So I'm here in the Pilgrim in Paddington, and this is a special episode of Rich Politics because I have two wonderful guests on the show. We're going to be talking, of course, about the crisis in Ukraine. Putin has invaded, as many of you know, all across your TV screens, not just on mainstream media, but other sources as well. So we're going to get both Sophie Corcoran's opinion and Alice Grant's opinion on what they make of the Ukraine crisis. Welcome to another episode of Rich Politics. And I'm with my good friend Sophie Corcoran. Sophie, say hi to everyone on Rich Politics.
Hi!
Many of you know Sophie from social media and everything else, and she's a very good friend of mine, and she appears a lot on talk radio and GB News, as many of you know. But she's with me this afternoon, and we're going to talk a little bit about the situation in Ukraine, with Putin obviously invading Ukraine. Sophie, I want to begin with this. Now, I posted a tweet a couple of weeks ago when Putin first started to invade Ukraine. Obviously it's 9-10 days now, but you know, we knew it was happening anyway. And I was literally attacked by people, and people were telling me that there's no war going on in Ukraine. They were like, you believe in mainstream media, Richard, there's no war going on. Why are you believing? What do you make of all that?
Yeah, I mean, it's the conspiracy theorists. You know, I don't use that word lightly. I don't like the term conspiracy theorists, especially when it was thrown around in COVID, but they are conspiracy theorists. I mean, there is a war going on. And trying to link it to all of the Great Reset and things like that, and the WF. I mean, it's not. Putin has just gone crazy and wanted to invade Ukraine.
Yeah, I think for me, you know, listening and watching not just mainstream media but other sources of media, because what people might not realise, you know, we have to digest a lot of news. You know, when we,
yes.
Like us as political commentators, we have to know what's going on, so we digest a lot.
We're not experts in everything, but we have to sort of know about everything.
Exactly. But did you notice how many people became war experts? You know, as soon as the war kicked off, all of a sudden, like they had military expertise on what should be done and how it's happening. And I was really surprised. I don't know if my viewers are. I was really surprised the amount of people that were pro-Putin.
Yeah, a lot of people on the right are pro-Putin. I don't really understand, because I always thought being right-wing was about pro-freedom, pro-democracy, and invading another sovereign nation has got nothing to do with either of those things. So.
But the argument I was getting on social media was that, you know, their history, of course, there's been issues with Ukraine and their president. But I think, for me, as we chatted off air earlier, you know, when innocent lives are being killed, irrespective of what some of the histories may or may not be, there is no right and wrong. That's just clearly wrong, isn't it? It's not right, is it?
No.
If that makes sense.
But it's like, the reason why they're so angry is because, like, the reason why Putin's angry is because the Ukraine have become very westernized. Obviously, they wanted to bring a part of NATO, and Putin didn't like that. So a lot of people are using that on the right, and their dislike for certain Western values to say that Putin was right. And he's not, he's a psychopath.
And some of these are the people who were, like, you know, anti-lockdown, pro-freedom people like ourselves.
On the anti-Ukraine bandwagon.
Yeah, but then Putin is like locking people up for like 10 to 14 years for protesting.
Yeah, and they're idolising him. I don't really understand where they're coming from. And I mean, he's a COVID nut job. Look at that long table. I mean,
well, apparently he likes table tennis, doesn't he, or something like that. So he's probably used to table tennis. But look, the war in Ukraine, right, it's going to affect us here massively.
Yep.
We've already seen an increase in the cost of living prior to the war.
But I mean, a lot of this is our doing, though. The reason why things have been able to escalate the way they have is because of the green nut jobs, basically. You know, the whole of Europe relies on Russia for their gas because of the Green Army wanting to chase this green fantasy, which is not only making our cost of living a lot worse, it's also screwing us over geopolitically.
Yeah. We're going to talk about the green agenda because it does play into it. We've seen the cost of living, inflation, and we know that it's going to hit the poorest in society, especially in Wales, where I'm from, and around the UK, because the cost of living has gone up exponentially, let's be honest. And it's only going to get worse. I mean, I was seeing stuff at the fuel pumps the other day. It was like $1.89 a litre of petrol. Looking at my gas bill, my electric bill is going to 3 times.
Most of it's taxes, though.
Yeah,
it's unnecessary.
Yeah, well, the part of the Brexit dividend was that we had took control of VAT, so we can get rid of it, so we can easily knock off 5%, but the government don't do it. Yeah. There's the green tax levy that some of you might not know about. We're actually paying around about 20%.
I think it's around like £300 roughly to most, you know, the average gas bill that comes from green levies. £300, that's a lot of money for people that can't afford.
And do you know where that goes? That goes to farmers to put windmills up on their fields. And literally that's where that goes, that green tax levy. And it, you know, this green agenda that Boris has got, we know that Farage and others have launched this kind of net zero referendum, which I fully support.
I support that.
Not from a party political point of view, but just as a citizen of the UK, I think we need to have a referendum on that. But going back to the whole war in Ukraine, I mean, I don't know about you. I just fear how it's going to end. I don't think it's going to end well for Ukraine, and I'm sorry to say that because, you know, me and my wife, we've been doing stuff for refugees. We've started collecting clothes, toiletries, stuff for people that are fleeing these war-torn countries, because these aren't genuine refugees. These aren't economic migrants. No, and I have this.
But this is the problem, because, you know, Labour and the left, they're getting really angry that the UK is not accepting as many Ukrainian refugees as it can. But how can we? We have a housing crisis, we have an NHS crisis, our schools are oversubscribed, the cost of living has gone up astronomically, and we can't just be an open door for every single refugee, especially when we're boating in loads of fighting age men from France. So if we want to prioritise real refugees, genuine women and children, then we've got to send these lot from France back home.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the refugees, from my understanding,
because they're taking up the resources
well,
that should be going to others.
They're a strain on our public services. We've seen that, but you know, we get called, you know, racist and fascist and right-wing nut jobs when we mention stuff to do with immigration, which is not true. I believe in, you know, supporting and helping genuine refugees who are fleeing war-torn countries.
France is not a war-torn country.
No, of course, and lots of the refugees coming from Ukraine who want to stay near their home. They want to go back there after this is all over.
But also those refugees that are coming from Ukraine have Western values and want to integrate into our culture should they not want to go home. Whereas those that are coming from elsewhere in the world, they don't share our values and our visions, and they just don't work with us.
So let's bring this to a close and so forth. And thanks for coming on the show as well. I really appreciate it. I'm down in London on a visit, and I had to grab her because she's a rising star. He's a rising star. How do you think this is going to end? I mean, let's talk about for Russia, how it's going to end for them, and how do you think it's going to end up for Ukraine? I know it's hard to say, but what's your kind of estimation?
Ultimately, I think the only way this is going to end is if Putin ends up dead. That's the only way it's going to finish, is Putin will end up dead somehow, whether somebody externally kills him or somebody within his own sort of close quarters, because he is effectively cutting Russia off from the rest of the world. There's no way, and I think he knows it as well, that's why he's hiding away, that he will end up dead, because there's no way Russia can back out because of the way it's been propagandised in Russia. So if they back down, you know, he's going to get killed anyway. But there's no way Ukraine are backing down either, rightfully so. So, you know, ultimately, in order to end this, someone's got to kill Putin.
Alice, what do you make of the Ukraine and Russia crisis?
Well, I'm pro-Britain and I'm pro-peace, but I also think it's very important that we look at the historical context of this argument, because it has been going on for decades. Of course, as we all know, Ukraine from its inception was essentially created by Lenin in 1922 in the Soviet Union. It was a socialist republic.
The old motherland.
Yes, yeah. Well, and so since then, obviously, Ukraine has historically had incredibly deep ties with Russia, and I think it's really worth understanding that this is a nation which, inside of it, has many Russian ethnic people, people who speak Russian, people who identify as Russian, particularly in the Donbass region. So these people, we should.
Well, that's why they were
definitely
annexed
remember
off, weren't they? Because they wanted to be part of Russia.
Exactly. So in the Minsk agreement after the 2014 revolution, in which Yanukovych was deposed, and by the way, this was funded by the West, US sided with the nationalist movement in Ukraine, which, by the way, I think it's also really important we just look at this nationalist movement in Ukraine. Because, so, what I see is that the Ukrainian people's patriotism is incredibly admirable, and the way they're fighting for the nation, I think, is something that I don't think we could do in here, in Britain or in the West.
Well, we don't have a military anymore, it's depleted,
exactly,
let's be honest.
Demilitarisation and decarbonisation will have to pay for those grave errors, I think, in the future. But if we look at this nationalist movement, we can see that there are, and this is for all to see, especially when you look at the Azov battalion, a lot of them are neo-Nazis. So that is one.
No, explain that, because I've seen lots of stuff on social media, as many have, this neo-Nazi stuff, and people then are pro-Putin. Not saying you in particular, but they don't get the other side. So explain to our viewers what that means, because we don't understand. We know what Nazism is, of course, but tell us what does that actually mean in Ukraine's context?
Essentially, you have these militarized groups, like the Azov battalion in Ukraine, who are causing immense problems within the population and causing lots of insurgents and violence, and they are militantly pro-EU, they're pro-West, and they want Ukraine to essentially cut its ties with Russia and to integrate further with the economic structure of the European Union, and the political structure too.
So this is probably why you've got this big reaction from Putin, because he has been warned in the West for quite some time, and Europe in particular, that he didn't like the way that he saw Ukraine go, unless Ukraine was part of the old USSR.
If you look 20 years ago, the Ukrainian people would have been completely pro-Russia. I mean, it's their brothers and sisters over there.
Yeah.
You know, in Russia, like they have
Yeah.
such deep historical ties to the nation. It would be a given. But this nationalist movement has been fabricated over the last 20 years, and in 2014 it kind of reached its climax when the Azov Battalion, along with other violent forces and groups, deposed Yanukovych in 2014 in a violent coup, which Russia was quite frankly horrified by. All because what? He rejected a deal to further integrate Ukraine with the EU. That is why he was deposed. It was because they were extremely angry that they weren't effectively, that he wasn't selling his country out to the West, and that he was pro-Russian, as most Ukrainian presidents have been. Zelensky obviously isn't. He's very liberal.
Yeah.
He's very pro-EU.
Well, he was an actor and a comedian, wasn't he,
Yeah,
before he became...
yeah, and that's another interesting
Yeah.
facet of Ukrainian politics, because actually their politics are very corrupt, which is also something that our Western media hasn't been delving in at all. Did you know recently a Ukrainian official was actually just shot a few days ago? One of the peace negotiators was shot because the Ukrainian government felt that he was a spy. So this is very corrupt regime we're dealing with here.
There's a
but of
question
course,
for you.
silence
I know
from
what I'm saying. We're going to talk.
yeah.
Look, the problem we've had here in the UK is lots of people the last 2 years have got a real distrust with mainstream media, simply because of what's happened with the COVID narrative and lockdowns and all the kind of stuff that we've been through, and many of us like us have campaigned and fought for and everything else. But that mistrust has led people to even get to a point, and I've witnessed it on social media, where people have denied there's even a war going on. Because they think that the media
There's
are telling them
definitely a
lies.
war going on.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you cleared that one up for us. But as you pointed out, I think it's important to hear both sides, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm all for that. People think I'm not. I tweeted something at the start of all of it, and people thought I was like, I don't know, they just hated me for saying what I said. My opinion was I didn't like the fact that a foreign power was invading a sovereign. How they became sovereign independent is another issue. I get that. And now they want to join the EU. I get that. And now you want a no-fly zone. I don't get that. That's wrong.
That's insane.
It is insane.
It would drag us into world war.
Literally.
What we have to remember about war is that it is an industry, and it's an industry which the Goebbels leads. Well, they relish in it, don't they? We don't just have to look at Iraq, Libya, Syria, all of America's kind of imperialist conquests, which have caused great destabilization and loss of many lives. But the thing is, what we have to understand is that the wider geopolitical picture here is that there is a new order emerging. There's a new world order emerging. The old world order has been governed by America, and obviously the West as well with that. And essentially what we're seeing is the rise of China. We're seeing the rise of Russia now. And it's becoming this tripolar world order. And the thing is that what we have almost forgot about in the West is that something that we can see throughout the whole of human history from like the beginning, is the fact that empires rise and fall. And in this case, Putin is right now, he has a very patriotic empire, and he sees himself as this czarist figure. He's not a communist. He's not Stalin, he's not Lenin. In fact, he acknowledges the damage that they did to his country, and he has a completely different vision for Russia, but it is one that's imperialist. We have to make clear. So he's and he understands the use of force as
he's in his 70s.
Really,
he's in his 70s, right? He's ruled for how many years, right? And obviously the way they don't, succession would be by appointment by the looks of it, that where Russia works. For sure. Elections, whatever. But at the same time as well, I think he sees this as his legacy, doesn't it? I want to do something. I might be wrong, I'm just a guessing. Is it, because I want to leave a legacy, behind as someone who took back what once belonged to Russia. Is that
Putin he's egotistical. He is driven by ego, but he's also driven by something which the West has forgotten, which is patriotism. He's driven by serving the interests of his people in Russia, and we can see that because if you look at the complete opposite, which is here in the EU and in the West, you've got Germany, this soulless mercantile nation, which is basically driven by profit, has morphed itself into the European Union, and does not serve its people. If you look at Britain as well, we're in a similar situation. We've destroyed our industries. We've demilitarized. We're decarbonising. This spells disaster for the interests of the British people, and our elites don't care. But Putin, he serves the interests of Russia, which is something I think that is definitely worth pointing out, because if you look at
whether we agree with what he's doing or not,
exactly.
The point is he's doing it in his own mind, his own ideological reasons. To him, make sense.
Well, for sure, and they make sense to the Russian people. As we've seen with Putin's reign, we've seen a resurgence and a restoring of Christian orthodoxy in Russia. We've seen patriotism, but also what Russia has, which the West seems to have just magically forgotten over the last few days is that it is abundant in natural resources. And the reason why that's so important is because what two things does a nation need to be able to continue? It needs fuel, it needs natural resources, and it needs a military, it needs an army.
Well,
and
he's
whilst
got that
in
in plenty,
Britain,
isn't he?
whilst in Britain and whilst in the West, we've been
virtue
basically
signaling, taking the knee.
Exactly, we've been castrating ourselves. We've been literally, I mean, it's a horrible way to put it, but it's true. We're on our path to humiliation here because we think that we seriously can stand up against Russia and stand up against China, who is Russia's ally. And that's a joke. Russia has gas, Russia has crude oil, Russia has steel, Russia has timber. What do we have here? What have we done to our industries? What have we done to agriculture? It's
well, you're speaking of a Welshman with the heart of industrial land,
no,
right? I know
exactly.
there's nothing left.
It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy, Richard, and it makes me really, really deeply upset and angry at the West. Because obviously I'm not here as a warmonger. I don't agree with at all with you know.
There's other means in it. But let
With
me ask you this.
invasion and
I asked Sophie early on in the
it's
show.
It's important we understand.
Yeah, and
what's
I think
going
you've
on
done that.
here.
In fairness, you've done that. Just because I asked Sophie the same question in the first part of the show tonight. How do you think this is going to end? You know, I mean, look, my opinion is that Ukraine are going to fail. I think the Russian army, you know, I don't think Putin cares about sanctions. I don't think he gives.
You know what?
He really doesn't.
You know what else Russia's rich in? It's rich in gold. Putin has a 500 billion war chest of gold. What happened to our gold? What happened to our gold in England? It was sold by Gordon Brown.
I can't even get silver, folks. Never mind gold, right? But anyway.
No, but can you believe that we've like actually
we've bankrupted ourselves,
yeah.
I mean.
What I see, okay, so the world works in empires, and that's the way the New World Order is looking. It's going to be a world order of empires, and we've got China, has basically established themselves an empire. We've got the EU empire, which is dwindling and disintegrating and deteriorating. And why is that? Why is that?
Isn't it? Yeah.
Because the EU do not serve the interests of the European peoples. They serve the interests of a small global elite who have centralized all this power, this economic wealth to themselves essentially, and have set up this kind of structure. Who's going to fight for the EU if there was a war between us and Putin? Who would fight for a bunch of buildings in Brussels? Soulless.
Well, they couldn't get
the
they couldn't even get a European army together, could they? Let's be honest.
They couldn't. But the thing is that that's not going to stop them from trying.
No.
As we can also see, on the other hand, we see remilitarization of Germany.
Yeah.
Has that ever been good for the world? Has that ever worked out well?
Folks, that's quite frightening,
the
isn't
thing
it?
is that we need to look at this from the perspective of the elites.
Yeah.
Because from the people's perspective, we can see that, okay, we sympathise with Ukrainian people, of course we do. They're fighting for their traditions, their ancestors, their nation, their culture, their heritage. But we also have to remember that actually the world is a lot more sinister than just the plight of these poor innocent civilians, that actually there is a whole machinery behind this. There's machinery that has been driving this war, that has been actually essentially causing this war, and that is all to do with NATO as well. That's to do with NATO, who in 2016, while we were all completely distracted with Trump and Brexit, were sending troops to Poland, Latvia, Estonia on Putin's border.
On the borders, yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry, but if that happened, we were an island, so we don't exactly have a grasp of what that would be like. But, I mean, thankfully. But can you, like, of course you're provoking Russia. Of course you're poking the angry bear.
You're poking the bear.
And do you really want to do that when the angry bear is a million times more powerful than you? And they have so much more social cohesion in Russia. They have an army that's willing to fight.
Yeah.
They have resources.
So that being said then, so how do you think this is going to play out? How do you think it's going to end? Because I've got my opinion. Sophie shared hers. I've got my opinion. I think that it'll end up with Russia, getting what they want. Putin's not going to stop. Sanctions ain't going to stop him. He's got a powerful military. I fear, though, personally, it's my personal opinion, which you may or may really disagree with, and we still have a drink afterwards, that he's not just going to stop with Ukraine, because, when you look at the reformed USSR, what it once was.
Well, he already annexed Crimea back
exactly,
in 2015.
Absolutely. So, is his aim to move further? And I think that's the concern internationally a lot of people have. For example, a lot of military now, they're moving in different parts of borders around Ukraine because they're fearful, whether in Slovakia, Moldova, Romania, Bulgaria, even places like that. They must be concerned for their security, having seen what's happened here.
Sure, but as I said, like this is a cutthroat world at the end of the day, and we see here basically, as I said, two empires. We have the EU empire on one hand and Putin's empire on the other, and its allies. And for all the kind of the emotional, manipulation from the media, at the end of the day, like, we're here celebrating like LGBTQ Day in the army. Putin's laughing at us. They're laughing at us. China, Moscow and Beijing came out with a declaration just earlier in February, which essentially said that their partnership was unlimited and that China has Russia's back. We've seen this already.
And the Belarusians as well, of course.
Yeah, well, of course, yeah.
Belarusians.
But also, you know who else has Putin's back? All the countries that have been invaded and effectively destabilized by America. Libya, Syria, Iraq, Iran.
Well, I don't think he's frightened of Joe Biden, is he? Let's be honest.
Of course he's not. Joe Biden's a laughingstock, and to be honest, so are we. That's the saddest thing, is that I wish I could say our country has something to fight for, that we're still a power. We're not anymore. We're not the British Empire. We're not this imperial
You
power
still haven't answered my question,
yeah.
How is this going to end?
Yeah,
How is this going to end?
Well, not well for the West, essentially. What I see here is, obviously, as we discussed, Putin's imperial ambitions for his nation. And you're right, he isn't going to stop. Obviously, I don't think we can exactly pinpoint how this is going to end, but I think Ukraine will have to cave into his demands, especially to do with allying themselves or just basically...
Do you think it'll be split? Ukraine will be split, so there'll be a border created. So Ukraine is here and Russia is taking their part.
I don't think so.
You know, because that's kind of that they've been talking about that. They created new borders in Ukraine. I mean, I've heard some discussion around
the
that.
thing about within the Ukraine is that you'd have to have for that to happen, you'd need to have a very clear division between those who are completely ethnically pro-Russian Russian speakers who want to be part of Russia, and then a more westernized contingent of the population. And the reason why that can't happen, as it isn't going to happen, is because you already have the Donbass region who are pro-Russian, who have always been pro-Russian, and they are the ones who, in the Minsk Treaty, essentially said that they would be independent, autonomous, basically nations in a way, regions. So that hasn't been respected by Ukraine. So that is also what Putin is fighting here for. He's fighting for the Russian people who are in Ukraine, whose wishes have not been respected. Instead, they've still been under violence from the Ukrainian nationalistic forces, like the Azov Battalion. There have been 14,000 people have been killed since 2014 in this conflict. Not, never mind just like the last 5 days. Like, this has been going on for a really long time, and this is very complicated.
Yeah, we know the media choose to broadcast what they want when they want, and we know that. And,
because right now they just need another crisis to distract us and to fill the headlines and to basically again radicalize a part of the population, like the crazy FBPs who just hate Putin with this like blind rage that we've seen so often from them. And I'm worried. I mean, if they want to go fight, then go ahead.
Well, folks, time is up. Alice Grant, you've heard it from her. Now, listen, we always like to get, different opinions. That's why, democracy is about that. Debate, different opinions. That's what we do. And you heard from Sophie Corcoran earlier. You heard from Alice Grant now. You can make up your own mind. Make up your own opinions. Do your own research. But the reality is, we know what's happening in Ukraine right now. We know there's going to be, tens of thousands of people are sadly going to lose their lives, because when it comes to any war, there are no winners. There's only losers, in my opinion. Thanks for watching Rich Politics. I'll catch you soon in another episode. Bye for now.